All right, so this is the Tuesday, March 16th COVID-19 Response Committee meeting. I'm Jesse Letterman, chairman of the committee. For the purpose of open meeting, this is a public subcommittee meeting of the Springfield City Council and is being recorded. It will be posted on the Focus Springfield page for future viewing. So we're joined by TJ Plant and Melanie Covey, and I know we also have some media on too, so we appreciate you being here. Our first two agenda items were relative to the neighborhood vaccination sites that are being stood up by the city. However, because the health department is putting on their town hall tonight at 6 o'clock, we were informed that there was no representative from the health department that was available. And we were also informed that there was no representative from the mayor's office available either. So we will revisit that topic at next week's meeting and hopefully put out as much information as possible as we receive it following tonight's town hall. But we'll take up our third agenda item, which is just a rundown of expected aid coming from the passage of the American Rescue Act. And we're joined now also by Councilor Justin Hurst. So Councilor Hurst, thank you for being here. So I'll turn it over to TJ to set us off on what we're anticipating coming in to the city.
So I'll go over a quick overview of what we've had to date in terms of revenue and expenses and the revenue loss. And then Melanie, as my point person, and I can answer any questions and walk through kind of what we think the American recovery plan is going to look like for us. And I'll get into that dialogue for that. So just so we're on the same page, the city has spent a total of $34 million on COVID spending. That includes $8.5 million in our deficit spending account and $25.5 million on various grants across the city and the school department. And in addition to that, the city has lost $8.8 million worth of revenue since COVID began, which is essentially a year ago today. And that's just the variable revenue, that the local source revenue. That doesn't include MGM, that doesn't include property taxes, because we have a way to collect that. So that's $3.9 million lost since the start of this fiscal year, since July 1st, and $4.9 million essentially lost for the end of fiscal 2020. Why that is important is, as you have been following and are aware, we actually have received numerous grants through the CARES money, but more specifically recently we received, we're going to receive, we haven't received it yet, is we're going to receive a direct allocation from the federal government through a formula that will have the city get a total, at this point, estimated $127.3 million direct funding to us, a stabilized government to cover COVID-related expenses, to cover police salaries, first responder salaries, firefighters, teachers, all the things that will help the city come out of the pandemic stronger than when we went into it. Now, I caution that number, there's two numbers. One is a $98.5 million number, which is the direct allocation to us as a city. And the second allocation is another allocation to us because the city, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts have abolished county government, that the county money that went directly to Hampden County has been divided up amongst the cities and towns within Hampden County. That has gotten us from the 98 to the $127 million threshold. I've had numerous conversations with Congressman Neal and Congressman Neal's staff. I've spoken with the House Oversight Committee, and I'm setting up meetings to discuss with the Department of Treasury kind of what we really need this to kind of go for. And what does that mean? Is essentially what I want to make sure is that we have a clear understanding of what the regulations are going to be and how they're going to be implemented, so that if we spend money on something, we don't have an auditor in 3 or 4 or 5 years come in and say that was not allowed and a disallowed expense and have to pay it back. So we're putting a lot of work on the front end, communicating with the federal government on what it means to be a city or town from Massachusetts. You know, it's differently than some other communities, given the way Prop 2.5 works, the way lost revenue has been working. You know, we know 8.8 million lost revenue is an important number that we know we can tie. There's going to be a huge conversation about property values. We know the commercial industry, there's going to be a less need, we think, for office space downtown if workers don't come back and they realize that telecommuting and remote working is something that works fine for their company. So we're trying to get as much information to the federal government, to the state government for that matter too, to inform them that please take into account all of these situations that as we spend the funding, we don't have it taken back. The interesting fact about the money that's going to become available, I'm not sure when exactly yet, it's actually appropriated until it's spended. That means it doesn't expire until we've spent all the money, as long as it fits the criteria in which the regulations, yet to be drafted regulations fit. So that's kind of a very high level. I don't know, Melanie, if you want to give a quick update on where we are with the FEMA, because that dictates a lot of what the COVID money now, plus the new money. Just to give a kind of overview. I don't know if you're ready for that.
Sure. So I can give definitely an overview. So the way that the state has been advising to us when they announced the CARES Act funding was, yes, you have this CARES Act funding, but you have to make sure that you're applying to FEMA still for you to have eligible expenses reimbursed through FEMA. And then CARES will pick up on what FEMA will not cover. And so we went ahead and submitted 2 applications to FEMA. Both of the applications are for expenses from March through September 15th. We did so because there are so many changes in the policies as to what they're covering, what they're not, that we wanted to wait and see what they respond with what they're going to cover before we move forward with other applications. So I want to say it's about almost $2 million in total cost expenses that we submitted on there. Now, that was submitted back in September. We just heard back now in March, mid-March, on one of the applications where they're sending us an RFI, which is a request for information. So basically, we're now in the negotiation process with FEMA to find out of the expenses that we have submitted. If they have questions on them, we can clarifying answers. But the reason why that's important and why I bring that up is because it's kind of holding up what we decide we're going to be doing with the CARE spending or even the new funding that we have. If FEMA says that we can't cover for those expenses, then we have to see where we can fund it in other expenses. And it's also holding up the process for us to submit a 3rd application for everything past September 15th. So it's a lot of weeding and strategically placing on the grants that we can, the expenses that are eligible for those. So as of now, we're in the RFI process of the FEMA applications.
And 4 questions, I'll just add one thing. As of February, it was determined by FEMA, the federal government FEMA, that they would cover 100% reimbursement instead of 75% reimbursement. And that is very significant because we were holding money back to pay out of other grant money to pay for the 25% city share, which will then free up another 3 to 5 million-ish for money available for other CARES programs. That's in addition to the allocation that's coming from the American Recovery Plan.
Great. Where will the money live, TJ? Is it that we're going to have to spend and submit, or will we actually receive the funds to be held by the city?
So those are all the questions I'm asking Congress and the Treasury. Is where are we going to get it all and sit on it here and then just do quarterly reports? I did hear that the reporting is going to be an absolute nightmare. It's probably going to be quarterly with an annual report as well. I don't know that for sure in the sense that they haven't seen the regs yet. But those are all things we want to get to. They're all things that our team is talking about now between Melanie, Lindsay, Pat Burns, and all the other, Richie Allen, is where does this money live? Where does it sit? Is it a drawdown, spend and then you draw it down? Is it here's your money and you keep it and then you just report on it? All stuff that we're trying to figure out.
Okay. We're joined also by Councilor Davila and Councilor Allen, so thank you all. If you have any questions, just raise your hand in the queue and we'll jump to you. TJ, one question I have is the county allocation. Was that, how did they determine how to split that up? Did they do it by population or did they just do it evenly?
No, by population. They did it prorated by population.
Okay, great. All right, are there any questions from counselors on anything so far that TJ and Melanie have gone over? Anybody would like to jump in? And while we, again, just raise your hand or feel free to unmute. One question I had, TJ, is, I just sort of have been keeping a running list of all the different things we've been talking about. I know, we spoke about hopefully being able to replenish the Wayfinders Fund for rental and mortgage assistance. So I'm hoping that can be on the table when we see this come in. Is that something that we would?
So I'll answer that in two ways. One is, once we get the determination from FEMA, I want to spend the CARES money first, and the CARES money, that is an eligible expense, because the CARES money actually expires on December 31st. So we want to spend that first, and then, but getting that extra, 3 to 5 million frees up a lot more money for businesses, for rental assistance, mortgage assistance, all the stuff that we've talked about.
And that was going to be my next piece, was the business grants. Yeah.
And in addition to that, a lot of the funding coming in through the American Recovery Plan can also go for those issues as well.
Great. I think the other piece is, now that we're ramping up local vaccination efforts, and I know what we have going on starting next week is sort of the beginning, and I think the state, hopefully, as the dosages become more available, and I also think as the city demonstrates its capacity, which I have every confidence we will, that will increase. So I think there will likely be expenses associated with that. Is that going to be able to be covered under this, or do we have another source that we anticipate coming in to help with that?
So FEMA is going to be paying 100% of vaccination costs. So anything related to the vaccination, refrigerators that are needed, for example, to store, any operational costs that are involved with that, it is reimbursable with FEMA at 100%.
So that'll be out of the FEMA reimbursement, not out of the direct allocation that we're getting.
For now, correct. And so that's another one of those that if FEMA decides to put in a policy last minute that they're changing, what they're going to cover, then at that point we'll have to reassess that strategy.
Okay.
For now, FEMA is going to be covering 100%, so we would charge it on our deficit account, the expenses. We have a special account that's actually tracking all of our vaccination costs so that we can be able to pull that easily and report it to FEMA.
Great. Councilor Davila.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Melanie. TJ, good to see you again. TJ, if I heard you correctly, I believe you say that some of this money could be used towards expense incurred within the police department? Yeah,
so basically, it's basically, from what I understand, it's to stabilize government. It's to, I know the quote-unquote heroes funding wasn't ever passed through Congress during the Trump administration, but a lot of this conversation was, we're fortunate as a community. We didn't go through layoffs as others have. Excuse me for a second. My thing's about to shut down. Sorry about that. So we're fortunate. We haven't had to go through layoffs and any serious budget cuts. We've been kind of planning for not planning for a pandemic, but we've been able to respond quickly to the pandemic. And so what we're going to want guidance on is exactly what the spending could be for, and is it to enhance the police department? Is it just to do a lot of technology upgrades? Is it to get vehicles? Is it, all the things that, right now during a pandemic, we went one-person cars, one-officer vehicles, and that put a strain on our fleet. So now we have a fleet that is turned over quicker than it would have, and is that a legitimate expense? I would argue yes, but I need to make sure that Treasury agrees.
Now, TJ, will that be retroactive, or is that in the future?
Again, once I know what Treasury says, a lot of things have been retroactive to the date of the federal declaration of the pandemic, and I would imagine that to be the case, but until I see for sure.
What I'm getting at, because the first thing that went to my mind, to be honest with you, TJ, was I would love to know. Actually, I'm kind of curious, if you could get that data, I would be grateful. How much time did we, in money, in both hours and money amount, did we have to pay out extra for officers being out with COVID-19?
Melanie, we have all that, don't we?
We do have that data, Councilor Davila, and I can send that to you. So FEMA reimburses us for any overtime costs that our public safety departments have done, including our police department.
Okay.
Include overtime costs that are as a result for officers that are out because they are either tested positive with COVID or they had exposure and so they're quarantining. And so if another officer had to do overtime to cover for that shift, and this includes also the fire department, at that point, we are keeping track of that and submitting to FEMA for reimbursement for those
Also,
costs.
it's also we're going to be made whole on that. That's great news. That's great
Yes.
news. Excellent. Thank you, Melanie. When you get a chance, you can send that data. I'm just curious. And again, TJ, Melanie, thank you for the good work in keeping the minutia and the numbers straight for us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. Any other questions for TJ and Melanie? I know we're kind of right now we're still in the very early phases, so still fleshing a lot of it out. But Councilor Allen, Councilor Hertz, anything you'd like to ask?
All set. I'm all set for now.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Allen.
I mean, I think the big takeaway for this is, you know, we've been through this before, through the tornado and all the other things, so we have been ready to be ahead of probably most communities in the Commonwealth. We've been able to weather this as well as we could be, and the Finance Department is definitely fully engaged and ready to get every penny that we're entitled to.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I think we can see that. I guess my initial thought is I wanted to see what the total number was and what we knew about the regulations already. And I see Councilor Hurst in the chat says he's all set, so that's good. So we'll be able to wrap up shortly. But I think my initial impression at the end of this meeting is 127 million is quite a bit, and it also sounds like a lot of the emergency side of things is still being reimbursed by FEMA. So I mean, I think we have to know what the exact regulations are.
Right.
When do we anticipate those being done? Because it seems like there's quite a bit of leeway here as to the spending.
So that's kind of where my concern comes in, and probably my anxieties of it, only because if you allow me to share the screen, I can show you the analysis that's been done for Springfield if you want to see it. But really what it comes down to is, what does Treasury think? And my goal is to get to the Treasury Department before they do regs and try to inform them, because I use Massachusetts as a different example. We do a look back of a year for property taxes. So we're not going to know the effects of the vacant office commercial space downtown until a year or two from now, or maybe the last 3 or 5 years or whatever. And then can you take that money and then directly offset the residents? Because, you know, you don't want to all of a sudden say your taxes is one number, you lose your commercial base, but then you put all of it on the residents. That's just going to hurt the residents. And that's not the intention of what we want to do. And it's certainly not the intention of what the money is for, is to stabilize the government. And so those are all questions we want to get to the Treasury Department before they draft it, so we don't have to do what Melanie's doing now, is fight with FEMA as it exists, you know, and just go over like the minutia and the questions that they come up with.
Well, and something that I'm concerned about, you sort of just touched upon it on our local revenue side that I've been concerned with is the inflation in the housing market, which I anticipate is going to downturn very quickly once real recovery sets in. But I think that, you know, our values are going to be set already. And I think that we're going to see a drastic increase in assessments that we're going to need to correct for somehow. And I've mentioned this to the assessors, and I intend to keep bringing it up. Again, I'm wondering, is there something here that we can do?
So
you just said.
That's exactly the stuff we're talking about, because that's exactly what my concern is I've lived through the contraction of the housing market from 2008 on. I've cut services, I've laid off to keep core services going. It's not fun. Housing is a bubble. We know that the bubble can burst or deflate or whatever it works. This run, and the market's still white hot, and it's going to continue white hot. But when it breaks, I don't want to be in the business of now having to decimate services because of the bubble breaks. Because that's just, taxes went down for everybody in 2008, 9, 10, 11, but services also had to get cut. And so there's a trade-off that I want to try to avoid. And that's why we try to build up reserves and revenue, so you save in the good years, and when the bad years come, you can backfill that with revenue. And I'm hoping that a portion of the federal dollars could be set aside for such circumstances.
Sure. TJ, what do we anticipate the process being for actually seeing this ultimately expended? Is this going to come as a special budget? Is this going to come as a financial order? Or is it, I mean, how will this work?
I would imagine it's going to be a combination of things depending on how it comes to us through Treasury. And again, I would literally just text my team that this morning saying, hey, we got to talk about how we're going to accept it. Is it council acceptance? Is it city budget process? Is it, how are we going to deal with it? And we're still too new to know.
Sure.
So just to add, these are all questions that were discussed in our recent MMA meeting with cabinet members from the Commonwealth, specifically ANF, that were discussing these very type of questions that they are trying to hash out based off of the actual law. So they did advise that they should be handing out to municipalities some kind of guidance of their interpretation of how it should be handled and that stuff. So when we do receive that, we'd be happy to share any information that we have. But at this point, we have no information.
I understand.
So we're trying to think of every scenario to be prepared to raise that with the Treasury Department when the time is right.
Okay. All right. So I think that all my questions are answered. I think for now, I think counselors seem like they're good. So I think what probably makes sense, TJ, is keep us posted on when you anticipate having those regulations out. And also, I'd be glad to, with your guidance, send something myself or in coalition with other counselors about, from our perspective, but with your input, what would be useful. I also think, I'll talk with Committeewoman, Vice President Whitfield about maybe doing something joint with the Finance Committee, because we covered the response here, so I kind of wanted to know how it applied there, but I'm sure we could do a joint meeting with the Finance Committee and talk a little more in depth once those items come out. If you could maybe let us know when you'll have that info, because there's no point in calling that until we really know what the regulations are.
Yeah, so I'll keep everybody in the loop on it. Like I said, it changes daily, or we're trying to get more information daily. It doesn't change necessarily. So we're digging into it. I'm reading every report that's coming out, every interpretation, trying to glean what I can. But I'm happy to report to this committee, to the Finance Committee, to a committee of the whole. The number is big, but there's going to come with strings attached, and I want to make sure I manage expectations to the extent that I can.
Absolutely. Last question I have, and then we'll adjourn unless there's more from other counselors, is just back on the housing piece. You mentioned now that we should feel comfortable allocating CARES Act. So when do you think we'll be able to get that allocation in? Because I'm still concerned with the state process being a little slow, and we know the numbers in Springfield are high. So when do we anticipate maybe being able to do an allocation to wayfinders?
That's a good question. I'll take it up with Tim Sheehan. I mean, we do have an available balance right now, Melanie, correct?
Yeah, they should have, there's creative ways that if it's not within that, fund, that we can find a fund that is appropriate for now until we get more answers.
Yeah, I think the question is I think we could probably do with relative speed.
I think so.
We have funding available. If not, we don't need to wait for FEMA to make they're a huge hulking bureaucracy. We don't need to wait for FEMA. We could probably do it in multiple waves, where we do one wave of money we know is available, and then once we get the full FEMA response, we can do it a second wave.
Right.
Yeah, as of 2 weeks ago, when we had checked in on the housing fund, there was still some left in the mortgage assistance, but the rental assistance was dispersed.
Yeah.
I mean, they're accessing rental from the state, but again, it's expedited when we do it through us, and it's targeted to Springfield when we do it through us. So I'd like to see that happen, and we could follow up to encourage Tim in that conversation.
Yeah, so let me talk to Tim Sheehan tomorrow, get a sense from him, and then get a sense of what Wayfinders can do, and in terms of a next phase or next wave of it, and see what we can do.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And something also on that same point, I believe we've confirmed that individuals who owe on their taxes, even if they have a mortgage and they escrow, they can access the mortgage assistance, and that's all tied together. But I actually believe we've confirmed with Wayfinders that if they owe on their taxes and they own their property, but they're financially impacted by COVID, they can also access that money. So it's going to end up being important for ultimate revenue in the future as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions before we adjourn?
I don't have any.
Seeing none. All right. Well, thank you all very much, and we'll see you all next Tuesday at 4:30.
Sounds good. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Yep, bye.